The New York Giants plan to let quarterback Jaxson Dart finish out these last two games, but should they? Locked on Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, now the number one sports podcast network in America. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Everydayer Club. We welcome our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, Giant fans, on today's show, the Giants, they've made a decision regarding Jaxson Dart. Interim head coach Mike Kafka has said that Dart is going to play the next two games, which are basically is the rest of the season. But I want to explore whether that's the right move for them or not. And I'm going to outline for you just kind of like some things that I've noticed along the way with how they've handled Dart and just kind of talk about that in the first segment. Then in segment two, what is the perfect Giants head coach? Not who. We'll get to who in another show, but the qualities that make for the ideal Giants head coach and who, I'll give you one name that I think is going to or actually I'll give you a couple names that I think fit the criteria. So we're going to try and build the best possible Giants head coach based on characteristics in segment two. And then in segment three, I want to talk about Abdul Carter and the job he has done these last few weeks. What has been the key to getting him, to unlocking his talent? There's been a couple of things they've done scheme-wise with him, but some other things that have gone on behind the scenes that have really made a difference for the young man and helped him to start to realize his potential. So that's what we're going to talk about on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, welcome on into everybody. Let's look at the Jaxson Dart question. Now, on Monday, during his weekly video call with reporters, Mike Kafka was asked, do you plan to play Jaxson Dart in these last two games? And Kafka, without missing a beat, yes, I'm going to play him. It's full steam ahead. Nothing's changing. Now, on the surface, you would think, okay, the more experience Jaxson Dart gets, the better. But here's, in looking at it, here's kind of what I guess is a little confusing for me. And that is, it just seems as though the Giants all this year have tried to protect Jaxson Dart wherever possible. So let's go back to the start of the year. Everybody knew it was going to be Russell Wilson to start, but, the hope was Russell Wilson would carry them through, but they became itchy to get Jaxson Dart in there. So then it became a matter of when was the best time to get Jaxson Dart into the lineup. And if you notice, they waited until week 4, which is when Andrew Thomas returned to the lineup full time. Thomas had played the week prior against Kansas City Chiefs in week 3, but only had worked half a game. So they waited until week 4 when the team at that point, was 0-3 to put Jaxson Dart in there. Okay, so that you kind of understand because you want the blind side protected. Then, just looking ahead, there was the design run issue. Brian Dable, he leaned on the design run a lot. Then, unfortunately, Jaxson Dart had the concussion that cost him 2 games. And when Kafka, at that point, when Dart came back, Kafka had taken over as head coach, and they cut back on the design runs. Again, part of that was due to the flow of the game, but some of that was also due to wanting to protect Jaxson Dart and give him, fewer opportunities to maybe put himself at risk. Okay. So now we get to the end of the season. Andrew Thomas is probably not going to play against the Las Vegas Raiders this weekend. He's got that hamstring injury. I don't think Andrew Thomas is going to play the following weekend either against the Dallas Cowboys, because what's the point? You don't know if you're going to have John Michael Schmitz at center. He's got the hand injury, right? So you don't know if he's going to be around. So basically, you're talking about playing Jaxson Dart with a compromised offensive line. Now, look, throughout his career, Jaxson Dart can't have everything perfect. There are going to be times when he's going to be missing linemen, he's going to be missing receivers, or what have you. But just given how the Giants have kind of set things up in a way to protect this kid and make sure he gets through his rookie season, it's kind of been interesting. So that raises the question of, is it worth it to put Jaxson Dart out there for the final 2 games, which really don't mean anything in terms of, there's no postseason. If anything, I think a lot of Giant fans are rooting for them to lose so that they hold on to that number 1 overall pick. So why play Jaxson Dart? And the argument that you can make to not play him is, why put him at risk for a potential major injury this late in the season that could compromise whether he is ready for the start of next season, more so also compromise him not being available to work on the field when the new coaching staff comes in. Because look, there is a new coaching staff coming in. We still don't know who. And the Giants, if you remember, the rules of the NFL, the CBA, when you have a new coaching staff, you can have an extra mini camp, right? You can start your offseason program a little earlier. So you would theoretically like to have Jaxson Dart, as well as all the other players, hit the ground running when that new coaching staff comes in and they are allowed to work with the players. You don't want to have Jaxson Dart, or anybody for that matter, spending part of their time doing rehab. But, injuries, if they're going to happen, they're going to happen. You can't predict them. But that factor alone could also be, used as an argument to say, just sit Jaxson Dart the rest of the year. I mean, we all saw what happened to Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes suffered a late season injury. Daniel Jones, same thing, late season injury. Those guys, may or may not be ready for the start of next year. Do the Giants really want to put Jaxson Dart in that line of fire? That's what the Giants have to really sit down, look themselves in the mirror, and say honestly, and be honest with themselves. Do they want to take that risk? There is a risk reward. And, I forgot to even mention, in terms of protecting Jaxson Dart, look at last week, how, rather than let him take his lumps against a defense, the Vikings defense, who runs, a very tough defense, which, by the way, Jaxson Dart is probably going to see a lot of those defenses moving forward in his career. What did they do? They ran a run-heavy offense, kind of like that time when Tommy DeVito got inserted into the game and they didn't trust him to throw. So I don't know. To me, there's sort of been like a mixed message or a recurring theme almost, in that they're trying to protect this kid and just, make sure everything goes according to plan and nothing messes it up. But yet to put him in for these last couple of games, which mean absolutely nothing. Now, you can make the argument that, the last few games have meant absolutely nothing. But, and they took the chance and he escaped without any, injuries. But how much more do you want to take that chance? And is it worth it to you as a franchise to continue taking that chance? Because again, now we're towards the end of the season. Anybody who gets hurt now or next week in the regular season finale, depending on the severity of the injury, they may or may not be ready for the start of next year. Certainly, they probably won't be ready for the spring when again, in the Giants case, when a new coach is coming in and installing new policies and new systems and new everything. So that's the pros and cons that I think the Giants have to weigh with Jaxson Dart. Is it worth it to continue getting him experience, especially if you're going to, you know, hold him back against the better defenses and better defensive players and without, and playing behind a compromised offensive line? Or do you just want to be smart about it and hold him out and not put him at risk? I'd be curious what you guys and gals think. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think about the matter. I'm kind of torn on it. I lean sort of towards, get him the experience he needs it. But given the circumstances, I can see making a case for not putting him out there. Of course, Jaxson, if he gets his way, he will be out there. And again, Kafka has said that he is going to be out there, that there are no plans to, sit him for the rest of the year. But let me know what you guys and gals think. I'd be curious about that. All right, coming up next, we're going to try and build the perfect Giants head coach. What are the qualities that they absolutely need to have, and who are some of the names that we know of that might fit those qualities? That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the fun places to make the right call is at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. You can choose from a huge range of unique stats, such as fantasy scores, field goals attempted, free throws made, turnovers, whatever fits your strategy. The early payout feature is a great bonus. When your lineup starts strong, you may get the option to cash out early. And the new Stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, like more on a quarterback's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up this week, we have Crossover Thursday. Your boy Q. He and I will break down the Giants-Raiders Tankathon Bowl, okay? The loser of that game should pretty much lock up the first overall draft pick. So we'll get you all squared away on what to expect there. The Raiders, of course, not a team the Giants see very often, so we'll break that down for you. And then on Friday, folks, there will not be an episode of Locked On Giants as I am taking a day off because of the holidays. So I'll be back with you after Crossover Thursday. We'll be back with you on Sunday night or after the Giants and Raiders game. So that's what we got coming up for you here on Locked On Giants. And okay, let's get into our next segment. Our next segment, what is the perfect Giants head coach? Well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if there was such a thing? Somebody who had every single characteristic and was just a perfect fit. And, it's just so hard to find those guys. For years, Bill Parcells was kind of the perfect Giants head coach. Tom Coughlin, in a way, was sort of the perfect Giants head coach. So in looking at what those two men brought to the table, here's what I think the Giants need to have in their next head coach. Number one, they have to find somebody with a winning pedigree. All right. Now, Parcells, he had not been an NFL head coach prior to taking over the reins. He quickly built a winning pedigree. All right. And throughout the 80s, the Giants teams were pretty good. They were pretty good. So, you don't necessarily have to have been a head coach and been, had a winning pedigree. It helps, but you don't want to discount the fact that maybe, you've got a young and upcoming coordinator who comes from a winning program and can, be that guy. So, winning pedigree, how to build a winner. All right. And that takes obviously commitment and not just this lip service. I mean, obviously, you've got to have the commitment, you have to have a vision, and you have to know, more importantly, and this is what has been lacking from the last several head coaches the Giants have had, how to fulfill that vision. Okay. You need a leader of men. Now, again, the last few head coaches the Giants have had, not so much leaders of men. Hold people accountable. Get rid of the country club atmosphere in the locker room and that exists around the building. Don't let guys who, show up late for a meeting or don't show to a meeting at all, call them out. That's the only way you're going to build character. You've got to not take fluff from the guys in the locker room. All right. And I think there were too many times when you had first time head coaches come in here, they wanted to be liked. They wanted to win their players over. And so maybe they were a little lenient when it came to, standing up and being that leader of men and just holding everybody accountable. That's been missing in the Giants locker room since Coughlin. You think Coughlin would have put up with, guys showing up late for meetings, especially, Coughlin, you better be in your chair 5 minutes before the meeting starts. Otherwise you're late. That's a leader of men. Parcells was the same way. All right. Parcells didn't hesitate to call out people if they weren't doing their jobs. So that's what the Giants need also in the perfect head coach. Ideally, you want to get a guy who is going to fit the market. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to some of you, but the New York market is very demanding. You cannot fold up in the face of pressure. There were coaches that did that after Coughlin. Okay, we all know who I'm talking about. You've got to be able to stand up to the pressure, good or bad. And, they haven't really had that either. Then there also has to be a coach that can optimize the talent. Now, to be clear with a head coach, obviously, he's probably going to have expertise on one side of the ball. And that's fine. But you also, look, if you have expertise on the offensive side of the ball, don't sit there and tell me, oh, that means he's not going to know about defenses. Because maybe he's seen some defensive things, from scouting film or whatnot and game planning, that he could say, okay, you know what? I saw this team do A, B, C, and D. Why don't we try A, B, C, and D? So in other words, he's got to be hands-on, CEO style. You can't just, come in, be the only, focus on one side of the ball and leave the other side of the ball solely to a coordinator. You can, put the coordinator in charge, but you have to have your hand in the pot. And again, the Giants really haven't had that. Think about it. All right. Brian Dable was offense. When he was calling plays, he basically left Shane Bowen and Michael Gabriel to do their own thing. Mike Kafka is kind of in the same boat. He's focused on the offense. Does he have a couple ideas here and there for defense? Sure. But pretty much the other 2/3 of the football team run themselves with their coordinators. So you can't have a head coach that's just going to be all about the offense or all about the defense. He's got to be CEO style and have a hand in everything. And I don't think the Giants have done a good job of that in recent years. All right, so that being said, who are some of the guys that might fit that? Marcus Freeman, obviously, of Notre Dame, is the name that keeps coming up. Right now, spoiler alert, I'm trying to get our Locked On Irish host on the show next week to talk more about Marcus Freeman. So I know somebody suggested that to me. That is in the works. So I'm hoping to get, like I said, somebody who is very familiar with Marcus Freeman and his coaching style on the program. You can make a case that Mike McCarthy has that pedigree that I'm talking about. Although, even though things didn't go down well in Dallas, And, some people will make the argument, well, in Green Bay, when they won the Super Bowl, they had Aaron Rodgers, future Hall of Famer. I mean, I'm not a big fan of McCarthy becoming the next head coach here, for what it's worth, but McCarthy does kind of fit that criteria that I've outlined. Steve Spagnuolo has been mentioned as a guy who fits that criteria. He had his shot with the Giants, I think it was for 4 games or something like that after Ben McAdoo got fired. Didn't quite work out. And I don't know, if they would go down that path again. I would be very surprised if they did. Jeff Hatley of Green Bay, I don't know enough about him, to be honest with you. At some point, maybe what I'll do is I'll touch base with Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers if Hatley does indeed get an interview, just to kind of find out a little bit more about what kind of coach he is and what he brings to the table. So, look, from the Giants' perspective, here's the challenge they have with a head coach. They are not, from what I understand, doing an extensive, we're going to look under every stone to find our guy. They have vetted the group down to I think, a handful. Lou Anarumo was also on that list, from what I understand. Here's, though, I hate to say this because I'd like to think this is not going to be the case. And this is where, Joe Schoen and his future comes in. I would like to think that if Joe Schoen is retained, that he brings in the right guy and not a guy who is going to get along swimmingly with him and not challenge him. There has to be a degree of give and take. And that's why you kind of say to yourself, okay, does it make sense to just start from scratch with everything? So I could see that argument being made and I can get behind it. But at the end of the day, whoever is vetting the list, and right now it's Joe, if he's just going to turn that list over to ownership and say, okay, I recommend this guy, and this guy, let's just hope that they have some of these qualities that I've mentioned, because the Giants, ever since Tom Coughlin, haven't really had that. And I know that, guys like Parcells and Coughlin, they don't grow on trees. Mike Tomlin, a Mike Tomlin type is another one if you're looking for a prototype for a head coach. A John Harbaugh down in Baltimore is a prototype. There aren't a lot of guys like that. That's what the Giants need, because this program is just fallen apart. And it's going to take more than just a little bit of creativity with the offense and the defense. It's going to take a leader of men, a guy willing to hold players accountable, and a guy who has a clear vision and a clear path to achieving that vision. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to talk about Abdul Carter, who has been playing pretty well the last couple of weeks. I'll tell you what I've seen, what they've done to maybe unlock some of Carter's potential, and then some. So that's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, before we get into segment 3, I want to thank you for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if you're just spending time with us, we appreciate that as well. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. If you're a true diehard New York Giants fan, the Everyday or All Access tier is built just for you. You'll get one-on-one text access with me, all access episodes, an exclusive daily newsletter, and a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store, amongst other perks. So head on over to LockedOnNYGiants.supercast.com to join the Everydayer program and unlock all access. You can also find the link in the show notes below. All right, Giant fans, let's get into our final segment, and that is Abdul Carter. All right. Now, Abdul Carter has been playing very well the last couple of weeks. Why? All right. So the first thing I looked at with Abdul Carter was how he's been deployed the last couple of weeks, and specifically where his sacks have come from. Now, one shift that the Giants have kind of done with Abdul Carter that I think has made a big deal for him is they play him a lot more over center. All right. So he's more of that middle linebacker, especially in those pass rushing situations. And that's kind of interesting that they would do that. And I'll tell you why. In his senior year at Penn State, Carter played a lot of outside linebacker, and he was good at it. He had success, but college is not the NFL. So just as the Giants kind of had to do with Jaxson Dart, with running a lot of things that he was comfortable doing in college, the Giants, once they fired Shane Bowen, they went back to putting Carter in the middle, or inside the box, I should say. And they've had better success with that because he's been able, to get his sacks there. He had one of his sacks that he had, the one against Minnesota. Carter came from inside the box. Now, in looking at the film, he was the New England sack that he had. He played outside. He had a sack in the second game against Washington where he was a wide 9. The Minnesota one, he was over 0. It gave a beautiful spin move against the center. Just watching the pressures and where they come from with Abdul Carter, putting him over the center or over 0, that's a pretty smart move if you think about it, because Carter, one of the things we talked about a lot from the summertime, Carter has this amazing spin move. He is so quick that before you even know it, if you're in your a 3-point stance as an offensive lineman, before you know it, Carter is by you. So why play him, outside a whole lot when it gives the offensive lineman a chance to stand up and set himself? You want to take advantage of Carter's speed, his quickness. And the Giants really weren't doing a good enough job of that earlier in the year, which is why maybe the kid was struggling a little bit to convert some of the pressures into sacks. Now, the other thing, obviously, that has factored in with Carter, he is playing with a plan, and that plan is coming from film study. Now, before anybody poo-poos that idea, think about this for a second. If you know that week you are going up against the opposing team's, let's say, right tackle, you want to know every single move that right tackle is going to make, every single one. Okay? How does he like to set up? How does he block? How does he, what step does he lead with? All of that. You want to have all of that stuff locked up so that you know what to expect. And these are the little details that Abdul Carter wasn't really honing in on earlier in his, rookie season. And now that he has started to do all that stuff, he's able to put together a plan. So that has made a difference for the rookie. And look, they say better late than never. And I get it. The season is over. And, you could say, oh, Carter finally woke up, but it's too late. But the future burns bright for this kid. You get a defensive coordinator in here next year who knows what he's doing, looks at the film, and says, okay, you know what? This kid has had a lot of success as a pass rusher, rushing inside. So let's use him that way. There's no harm in doing that and having him go back to his college roots. You go back to when Justin Tuck was here. Justin Tuck was as a defensive end, but I would say more than half of his sacks and pressures came when he was moved inside. It's just, something that happens with some guys. Sometimes they're better, you see, oh, they're a defensive end or an outside linebacker, but sometimes they're better inside. And if that's the case with Carter, then stick with it, because the kid can play. And now that he finally seems to have woken up and figured out that he can't skate by on talent, that he has to work at it. Now that they figured out a good way to use him, just keep rolling with it, because the future's bright for Abdul Carter. And the more reps he gets, the better. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Again, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Giants so that you get all the latest episodes. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Giants and follow me on Twitter at Patricia_Traina, Traina. If you need a last minute gift for someone this holiday season, or if somebody keeps asking you what you want, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club. Ad-free episodes of this show, exclusive Discord server access where you can talk ball with the Locked On hosts as well as other fans, and a whole lot more. And you can customize that Discord server, by the way, to your liking. So if you're just interested in the NFC East, you can do that. If you're a Mets, Yankees, and Knicks fans, you can do that. You can join whatever group you want within that Discord server. We have all the sports covered there. Subscriptions can be gifted through LockedOnNYGiants.supercast.com. And before we say goodbye, again, for your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On NFL podcasts. All right, Giant fans, that'll do it for me. I'll see you tomorrow for Crossover Thursday with your boy Q. Thank you for listening.